everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Climate Change and Me. My name is Matilda and I'm your MC for today. So on behalf of World Vision Singapore, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on a Saturday morning, and we are very excited and happy to have you here with us. Okay, so just some webinar guidelines before we start this session proper. For the best viewing option, please click View Options at the top and click Side-by-Side mode. This will help to enhance your webinar experience today. Please also use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for your speakers or about our work, feel free to type your question in the Q&A function, and we will try to address as many relevant questions during the panel discussion and Q&A segment. So this webinar is expected to last for about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and it is also being live streamed. A recording will be made available after the webinar, so for security purposes, please do not attempt to record this webinar on your own. Okay, now that we have got the guidelines out of the way, let us just take a watch a short video to introduce today's topic of climate change and me.
Oceans are warming.
Extreme weather events.
Yes,
About
climate releasing more greenhouse gases than ever.
Every country in the world is now facing a problem with climate change.
Welcome back. So as shown in the video, every country now is facing the problem of climate change. But although much of the public debate still centers largely around polar bears or melting sea ice, as well as chasing numbers and infographics, we are in reality also witnessing an increasing frequency of droughts, flash floods, sea level rise, as well as pests and diseases, which are disproportionately impacting the poor and vulnerable people, especially children. So for today's webinar, we aim to really shine the light or the spotlight on the human faces of climate change who are often forgotten. So to do this, we have with us three very special speakers to share their stories with us. They will first present their individual sharings before coming together for a panel discussion as well as Q&A segment. So at this point, I would just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions at all during this webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, you can also WhatsApp us at 6922-0113, and we will try to address as many questions as possible during the panel discussion and Q&A segment. Okay, but before I invite our speakers for their sharing, I know that some of you in the audience here today have not heard about World Vision before. So I would just like to give a quick introduction on what we do. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, World Vision is a Christian humanitarian organization, and we operate in nearly 100 countries worldwide. So World Vision is dedicated to helping the most vulnerable children to overcome poverty and experience the fullness of life. So we serve people regardless of religion, race, ethnicity, or gender. And over the last 70 years, World Vision has partnered with local and international stakeholders to improve the well-being of children and address the root causes of poverty. So through our child sponsorship initiative in particular, we have been actively improving livelihoods, education, healthcare, water, as well as child protection. But despite the successes that we have made in the last 70 years, poverty still very much exists in our world today. In fact, what we have noticed is that the faces of poverty is also gradually changing, and the most vulnerable are increasingly residing in the world's darkest and hardest to reach places. So global poverty is now not only a rural child left behind without opportunity, it is also a street or slum child left unprotected against exploitation. It is also a child refugee forced to grow up in conflict. And more importantly, we are also witnessing that poverty now is also a starving and homeless child affected by climate change-induced disasters. So in fact, if you look at our world today, it is honestly the first time that a global generation of children will grow up in a world made far more dangerous and uncertain as a result of the changing climate and degraded environment. So what we see is really millions of children living in flood and drought severity zones, leaving them exposed to increased child protection dangers, homelessness, or even malnutrition. So simply put, climate change isn't just an environmental problem. It's also a development problem where climate change threatens to undo the last 50 years of progress. So therefore, climate change, while usually associated with polar bears and melting sea ice, in reality also has a human face. So climate change is the face of a child whose home has been destroyed by disasters. It is the face of a mother who cannot find food for her children. And it's the face of a community who are fighting for their livelihoods. But not all hope is lost. So World Vision has a long history of implementing programs that address the impacts and causes of climate change and aim to deliver positive outcomes that, for the vulnerable communities and the natural environment. So we aim to create a world where children do not need to fear nature and nature does not need to fear them. So we are committed to safeguarding the futures of children and the environment that they live in. After all, we cannot truly love our neighbors without caring for the land on which they, as well as we, depend on. So for today, we hope that this webinar will help to shed some light and bring to your attention some of the stories from the field, stories of transformation and change with regard to climate action, as illustrated by 3 inspiring individuals. So let me first introduce our first speaker of today. His name is Tony Rinaudo. He is World Vision's Senior Climate Action Advisor, but more informally known as the Forest Maker. So having lived and worked in Africa for several decades, Tony has discovered and put in practice a solution to extreme deforestation and desertification. His method, known as farmer-managed natural regeneration, has resulted in over 200 million trees in Niger alone. But for us to fully appreciate what he does, let us watch a short video on his pioneering work on farmer-managed natural regeneration, also known as FMNR, before he shares with us his story. So let us watch the video.
Imagine, trees could be growing on degraded land. Imagine, desertification could be stopped. Hundreds of millions would not have to leave their homes. Imagine, all that is needed is still there, right beneath our feet. Imagine, a whole underground forest is waiting to emerge again. Desertification is advancing at an alarming pace. People have given up. They feel like helpless victims of climate change and poverty, whose only option seems to be migration. But there is hope. Australian agronomist and alternative Nobel Prize winner Tony Rinaudo discovered a simple technique, making global regreening possible. What looks like small shrubs and bushes are actually trees, waiting for the opportunity to grow, feeding on the enormous root system that is still intact. The pruning consists in reducing the number of stems so that they can grow straight and tall.
It's embarrassingly simple. People are expecting some big scientific explanation and complex machinery and all this kind of thing. It's embarrassingly simple, but I'm not ashamed because it works.
The farmers manage the pruning themselves.
Every 2 months, we do the pruning.
Word is spreading fast from Senegal to Somalia. In Niger alone, 6 million hectares of forest have already been restored.
You can visibly see the difference.
7% of the Earth's surface could become green again. 2 to 3 billion hectares of land, producing wood and food for hundreds of millions. And more importantly, giving people back their dignity.
But what I really see when I go back into the villages is the restoration of hope. And when you have hope, you can do anything. You believe in yourself, you believe in the future. The restoration of hope is the real gift.
Imagine we could spread this message around the globe and achieve restoration on an unprecedented scale.
I firmly believe that with the right production methods, Africa could easily feed the world.
Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of Tony's work, let me introduce the man himself. Tony, would you like to share with us your story?
Thank you, Matilda, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So my family and I moved to Niger Republic in 1981. And that's not forwarding, Matilda. Okay, so we moved to Niger Republic in 1981, and what I witnessed was a landscape at the point of ecological collapse, a landscape barely able to support life on Earth. And this came about as a combination of climate change. That region had experienced a 25% decrease in rainfall and increasing frequency and severity of droughts. So climate change and also deforestation that was going on. The increasing, and this brought about increased drought, which contributed to crop failure, the death of livestock, and desertification. And with that, of course, there was more hunger. And when people are hungry and poor, they practice unsustainable tree harvesting just in order to stay alive. And this created a vicious cycle of poverty, hunger, destruction that fed on itself and amplified itself. And everybody suffered. But women and children in particular suffered more. And when you think of it, less rain, more frequent droughts and so on, the water tables dropped. And so it became harder and harder to draw water from the already very deep wells. Women had to walk further to collect fuel wood and fodder for the livestock. And in years of hunger, they would walk to remnant pieces of bushland in order to collect wild foods as well. And then when the men folk left in order to find food and money to send back home, the women were left alone at home to fend for themselves. So their life was very, very tough. And so we were involved in famine relief 5 separate years. A century ago, a big famine would occur perhaps once in 50 years, and then more recently, once in 30 years. By the time we lived in Niger, famine was occurring every 5 years. Children died, families were displaced and separated, and it was a time of great suffering and uncertainty for people. So while I lived there, as you saw in the video, I developed and promoted a very simple, low cost and scalable method of reforestation called farmer managed natural regeneration. And over the following 20 years, more than 5 million hectares of land were restored with about 200 million trees without planting a single tree. And since then, the area has increased even more. The estimates range between 6 and 10 million hectares. So what was the impact of that? Gross income, the value of what people consume plus what they sell, has increased by about $1,000 per household, or cumulatively across Niger by about $900,000 per year, every year. And grain production, not because of fertilizer or irrigation or better seed, simply because of the improved environment, grain production has increased by 500,000 tons per year, feeding about 2.5 million people. So that restoration work has had a very significant impact. I joined World Vision in 1999, and my mission is to spread this revolutionary approach into 100 countries that World Vision works in. And in my time in World Vision, I've had such an exciting time. I've been able to introduce it into 26 countries so far. These photos are from southern Ethiopia. When World Vision moved here in 1984, the area was experiencing famine. And we were obliged to give one level or other of food relief year after year for more than 20 years. And yet, within 6 years of restoring the forest, this historically food aid dependent community sold 106 tons of grain to the World Food Programme. So that today there's food security, children are in school, water springs and streams are returning, and the people have more fuel wood, more fodder, and their crops are doing much, much better. So what am I doing now? I support World Vision's scaling model for this method. It's called Regreen the Globe. World Vision is an official supporting member of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. We've formed alliances and partnerships with other non-government organizations, with research institutes, governments, and donors. And I teach, I speak at conferences like this one, I write articles, and so far, as I mentioned, this method has been introduced into at least 26 countries and counting. And you can see there the grain in one of the storehouses in that area of southern Ethiopia. The water's returned, people now have fodder. So it's a completely different picture to what it was a decade ago. And these are some of the countries that FMNR has been introduced to through World Vision, but through the partnerships and through working online, it's spreading even well beyond what World Vision is doing. So I was asked, what made me decide to act, and what do I hope will be the impact of my actions? When I was a child, I grew up in a beautiful part of Australia, the Ovens Valley. I climbed those hills. I fished and swam in those rivers. And I just loved nature, loved creation. But my life was shaped by three significant things. One was my mother's faith. And it taught me that there's more to life than material possessions, and that we are our brother's keeper, and that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the environment. While I was growing up, that bushland that I loved was being bulldozed and replaced with monocultures. And I could see something wasn't right. The erosion, the higher temperatures, the loss of biodiversity. At the same time, I would read the news, I would watch television, and I couldn't understand how we could justify growing tobacco in our rich valley while children just like me, who through no fault of their own were growing up hungry elsewhere. And I was angry, I was frustrated, but I was powerless. So I did the only thing a child could do. And I said a very simple prayer. Please, Lord, use me somehow, somewhere to make a difference. So that's how it started. And through catalyzing a global FMNR movement, I want to see at least 1 billion hectares of degraded land restored. I want to see desertification reversed and a return of biodiversity. I want to see significant mitigation against climate change because this method helps to draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. I want to see no more hunger or poverty-driven migration or extremism. And I want to see a world that becomes greener and a happier place to live in. So thank you, Matilda.
Thank you very much, Tony, for sharing your story. It was really inspiring to know that just from a young age, you wanted to change the world, and you have actually pioneered this innovative and life-changing technique that protects not only the people as well as the planet. For those in the audience who may not know this, but the FNNR technique that was pioneered by Tony has actually had far-reaching impact beyond just regenerating the lands and providing food. In recent years, FMNR has also been used in places like the Philippines to support abaca farming. So abaca is actually a type of plant that is widely known to be a viable solution to climate-related issues that we are facing in our world today, most specifically in terms of reducing plastic waste. So the strong fibers of the abaca plant allow it to be utilized in various forms, such as reusable grocery bags, or even tea bags, coffee filters, and currency notes. So today we have with us another speaker, Allan Masibay, who will be sharing a bit more on how we can say no to plastics and poverty and yes to biodegradables and income. So Allan is a farmer and a village leader from a World Vision supported community in the Philippines. He has spearheaded various climate-related activities like planting of bamboo trees along the riverbanks, as well as helping to facilitate recycling and proper waste disposal, as well as enabling his community to stop chemical and electrofishing. But more recently, Allan has been involved in farming abaca using the FNNR technique. So because his internet connection right now is relatively unstable, he will not be turning on his video, but yet we are very happy to have him here with us. So without further ado, let me invite Allan to share his experience on abaca farming as well as his climate change experience. Okay, so Allan, Allan, would you like to start?
Thank you, Matilda.
Thank you.
Next slide. Mayong adlaw, sending our greetings from the Philippines. Yes, Matilda.
Hi, Allan.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, we can hear you right now.
Cotabato City is the seat of North Cotabato province, situated at the foot of the highest peak in the Philippines, the known Mount Apu. The city is composed of 40 barangays, and 4 of these major areas are covered by World Vision Philippines. These communities are Hinatilan, Perez, Poblacion, and Magsaysay. These areas are mostly composed of indigenous people who belong to the tribe of Romanon Manubo, considered the early farmers in the area. Next slide, next please. In North Cotabato, abaca is the dominant crop for cash income among indigenous people communities where we have ancestral domain claim which surrounds Mount Apo. It is also where many small-scale farmers engage in abaca production. However, in these last 10 years, the numbers of abaca farmers started to decrease because the use of adulterated abaca planting materials resulting to crop losses. Sourcing reliable local abaca suppliers has been a challenge. During one of the meetings with World Vision, we recommended to revive abaca farming because we find it useful to preserve our forest area at the same time provide income to families. Next slide, please. World Vision distributed 10,000 hills of tissue culture abaca. Farmers in our community started planting abaca and we have gained positive response. Next slide, please. In 2019, World Vision and its partner government agencies conducted a training where we taught the process of making use of abaca to produce byproduct like fashionable hats, sleepers, placemats, and other marketable yet practical items. It's give us inspirations and encouragement that abaca is a promising commodity that needs our support to generate income for our farming communities. However, how our local government maintains the vegetation within the watershed area. Next slide, please. According to our elders, since 1970s, the local environment bureau already saw the need to preserve the watershed area. Since most of the people living within the range of almost 300 hectares of watershed are indigenous people who usually practice the slash and burn way of farming. A personnel from the local government unit offered them a livelihood project to help control the gradual cutting of trees, while others hired as forest ranger. I can still recall between 1980 to 1990s, we have needed to wear coat because of the thick fog covering our area. The weather was so cold. When the banana plantation started to operate in some parts of our community, some farmers started to cut trees. Our weather condition then was greatly affected and became less cold. When I was still the village leader in 2007, I passed a resolution that controls the cutting of trees. This highlights the provision that farmer or local residents need a village approval before or she can finally cut a tree. This remains effective and ongoing. To help maintain the watershed area, the local government unit and the local water district allow to the people to intercrop abaca among the trees without disturbing the natural vegetation. This adds to the income, especially among the indigenous people. We are also grateful that we recently received a support from UN, our partners from Singapore, for the abaca project. I'm confident that more farmers will benefit and that our target to cover at least 300 hectares of land. Integrating abaca will become more feasible. World Vision staff has initially set a meeting with us to conduct initial activities such as consultation meeting with potential government partners, with representative from the City Agrarian Reform Officer, Agricultural Office, and the local government unit of Cotabato City. We will set another meeting among our farmers in the area and other beneficiaries, especially the IP members who are still preserving the indigenous knowledge system on abaca production. We will also identify current gaps in abaca farming. We are planning to validate the proposed area for abaca nursery and later source out quality abaca sucker suppliers within the area. We know that this is still a long journey, but we are looking forward that this project will not only give us the opportunity to earn extra income.
Okay, so sorry for the technical difficulties. I think Alan has dropped off, but he's back. So maybe we give him a few minutes to see whether or not he can connect to the audio.
Okay, ma'am?
Yes, welcome back. Thank you so much. Yeah, so Alan, if you're there, do you want to continue with your presentation?
Yes, ma'am. We know that this is still a long journey, but we are looking forward that this project will not only give us the opportunity to earn extra income out of our farm crops, but at the same time, emphasize our core responsibility in caring for our environment and help control the effect of climate change by preserving our trees, especially in our watershed area. Abaca will always be part of our farming and be part of our children's journey and future as well. Next slide, please. Daghang salamat. Maraming salamat po. Again, I am Allan Masibay, your abaca farmer from North Cotabato, Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for coming on to share about your story and for all your insights. It's really heartening to hear that the simple act of planting a abaca can not only increase the number of trees, but also protect the watershed areas and increase the incomes of the indigenous local families in the area. So thank you very much for sharing with us all this information. And even though it's difficult in terms of the internet connectivity there, thank you for persisting as well to just share your story. And it's also very great to hear that when you say that, such interventions is not only at the present, but will also be part of your children's journeys and futures. So thank you very much for sharing your story. Okay, so now speaking about the children's futures, our next speaker is actually a very young girl called Nomundari. So Nomu is a 16-year-old youth advocate from Mongolia. Not only is she an active member of World Vision's Children's Club, but her passion for climate change has also led her to give a speech at a United Nations forum on this very topic of climate change. So today, we have invited Nomu to shed a bit more light on the multifaceted issue of climate change based on the experience that she has had in Mongolia. So Nomu, would you like to share your story with us?
Yes, so let's all get into it. Okay, climate change. What I'm about to tell you is just a little piece of what climate change is and a big advice on how to overcome it. So, now, I don't know much about every other country, but I know enough about my country. And Mongolia was and still is one of the most polluted countries in the world. Next slide, please. Okay. From 2018 to 2021, Mongolia has been and still is in the top 10 countries with the most air pollution. Instead of going down, our numbers actually went up. And we can all tell that that's not a really good thing. Next slide. Now, because our lungs, our children's lungs, are not fully developed yet, the effect that it has on us is way more than it does on adults. Here's a quick example. A couple of years ago, I was hospitalized from the effects of air pollution. I spent a month in the hospital being woken up every 5 hours for all kinds of shots. For someone who hates shots and hospital, it was a true nightmare. Now, our air pollution is just so suffocating that you can even feel, you can tell even before you breathe it. In Mongolia, we still have coal power plants, and during the winter, the pollution is terrible. Now, if you look at the picture over here, this is a poster about air pollution, and one of the girls in the picture is me when I was young. Now, from what I know, starting from 2006, we warned and demanded to take actions regarding the problem for so many years, which is funny because we're still doing the same thing even today. And we still have the same problem. Instead of decreasing it, it actually increased. Now, the question is, what did we do? What did we exactly do during this time? What did we do to, at least decrease it a little, at least make it better? And to answer that question, I have no idea. Because from 2006 to 2017, it became even more serious. And that's when the government suddenly made a brave decision to change things up a little bit. The 2017 Mongolian National Program on Reduction of Air and Environmental Pollution aims by 2025 to decrease air pollutants by 80% and calls for prohibiting the use of unprocessed coal everywhere, except in thermal power plants in Ulaanbaatar. Now, this project has been going well, but we didn't really consider it being used on it being like inhaled by humans, by people. So there have been a lot of cases of death because of the new unprocessed coal. And sadly, I lost 2 of my uncles during the process of it. It's a sad story, but at least we're trying and it's becoming better. Next slide, please. Now, next problem is water pollution. Now, why is water pollution important? We all know that water covers 70% of the Earth's surface and is a very important resource for people and the environment. Water pollution affects not only drinking water, it affects rivers, lakes, and oceans all over the world. It's not just one country problem. This consequently harms human health and the natural environment. In Mongolia, 82% of our total water supply comes from groundwater. And yet, we're one of the 60 countries with limited freshwater resources in the world. The major cause of our water pollution is lead, arsenic, and other toxic chemicals released during the gold extraction processes. That has leached into Mongolia's groundwater, that 82% of groundwater, and flowed untreated into rivers. Exposure to these pollutants can cause severe long-term health effects, from skin and bladder cancers to irreversible immune system and neurological disorders. Every year, and now this is a fact, every year in my country, there are disease outbreaks from contaminated food or water, and children, especially young ones my sister's age, die. It's clear to see that we sure do have a problem. This is a survey report of 2016 that I found in the library. In 2007, there were almost 12,000 cases of 6 enteric diseases, comprising 29% of the total infectious diseases. In 2008, this shot up to almost 40%. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any more recent data. This only reveals that we don't really have much of a resource these days, and really we need to survey again and again and present that to the public to know and inform how poor water and climate is affecting not only children, but everyone in Mongolia. Most of my peers in Ulaanbaatar don't know the specific problems happening in our country or the world. We need to be more educated on this topic to prepare and help out more in the future. Climate change is not just our future, is not affecting not our future, but our health too. And we did the least, yet we're suffering the most. What I want the adults to do is to educate us on this topic and get us involved. Let us help you. And then listen to us. We may not be experienced as much as you do, but at least we have new ideas that you may or may not have thought of. And that's a good thing. Right now, adults are underestimating everything, both children and the scale of climate problem. It's important to tackle things now when they're smaller. Otherwise, things are only going to get worse, just like the air pollution in Mongolia. We didn't tackle it right then and there. We made it worse, and that's not a good thing. However, we children, even though we have limited resources of how we can help, what we will be doing is that we will be joining forces together from all around the world and aware the others of what's happening, making change in the smallest of places, like our school, our classmates, our friends, influencing our peers to do the right thing, planting trees and living as eco-friendly as we can. I mean, this is the least we could do. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Nomu, for your insights into what is going on in Mongolia and for really taking that stand on climate issues, especially at such a young age. It's quite inspiring to hear someone who's just 16 being committed to make this world a better place, not just for the environment, but also for like your peers in terms of air pollution as well as water issues. So we truly hope that we will be able to involve more people, especially the young people like yourself, in this fight against climate change to secure our children's futures. And interestingly, just last month, I'm not sure if you know, World Vision Singapore actually organized a 30-hour famine camp involving 420 youth to encourage climate action right from Singapore itself. So for 3 days, they actually participated in a series of challenges where they tried to walk in the shoes of a child whose life has been impacted by climate change. So for example, they learned about what it was like to live in drought and having no food to eat. So they had to try to eat vegetarian food, fasting, reduce their water usage, recycle materials in their homes, as well as create awareness videos just to share with their friends to raise awareness about climate action. So it was interesting in the sense that during those 3 days, the 420 youth participants actually accumulated points, which enabled a private donor to be inspired to plant trees on their behalf to reward their climate action efforts. So specifically, the efforts of the youth enabled 12,050 trees to be planted in Philippines, and hopefully, Nomu, you'll be happy to know that the youth in Singapore are actively standing alongside you to fight climate change, and hopefully more people will come on board as well. So this is something that we are happy with, and yeah, hopefully this will be the start of something bigger. Okay, so now that we have heard all three speakers share their inspiring stories about their climate change experience, I would also like to invite Nomu, Tony, as well as Allan to a short panel discussion and Q&A. So for those of you who are listening to this webinar right now, we would very much love it if you would be able to participate in this segment. So if you have any questions for our speakers based on their sharing, or any just off the top of your head, just some questions that you may have about World Vision's work or any of the work that any of the things that have been shared, please feel free to type your question in the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, or WhatsApp us at 69220113, and we will try to address as many relevant questions as we can during this time. Okay. So maybe to start the ball rolling while we wait for all the participants to send in their questions, one thing we noticed when we spoke to the different participants was that we asked the three participants to share their personal experience about climate change. But interestingly, all of the speakers highlighted the importance of involving locals on the ground, be it youth in Mongolia, the indigenous families in the Philippines, or even the local communities in Africa. So maybe we can take a deeper look about this. So since Nomu mentioned about actively involving young people in the fight, so maybe we can start with Nomu. So what actually made you want to become a climate activist? Like, how did you get started on this journey?
The first time I started was like, well, I didn't really start to encourage people. More of like, I started to realize that I was actually harming the earth, and that without my knowledge, I was harming it. And then it occurred to me, maybe a lot of others are also doing the same. So instead of just standing by and doing nothing, I wanted to tell people and make them aware of the things that they're doing. I wanted them to realize that what they're doing is wrong, and that they need to like change. If they just change their like a little bit of their bad habits, then we could all change the world. And that itself sounded just so marvelous to me that I just wanted to encourage people of doing it. And I like officially started like doing this since like 2 years ago. Before that, I just, like I did small things. Like I tried to encourage, I first awared my family, and then that turned into my friends, and then that turned into classmates, and then that turned into strangers. So it was like a baby step.
That is quite impressive. Like from you as a center, you managed to spring out and to have the ripple effect on everyone around you. So that's nice to hear that, just a single individual can make such a big difference. What about Tony? Like for you as well, yours started from a personal experience as well. And actually the work that you pioneered, interestingly, involves a lot of interactions with the local communities. In fact, farmer managed natural regeneration by the name itself already implies that it needs to be farmer managed. So what prompted you to want to work with the local people in the fight against climate change and in tree planting? And how important is it to involve the local people on the ground?
Thanks, Matilda. So it's actually critically important, and ultimately success or failure hangs on working with the local community. And in addition to that, actually enabling them and empowering them to take action. So when you think about it, they're the ones whose livelihoods, and very often their very lives, and you saw my slides, their very lives depend on getting it right. And they have the most at stake. So that when you offer a solution, they will be highly motivated to do something about their situation. And that's what prompted us. As has been mentioned, FNR is a tool for both mitigation and adaptation to climate change. So we've taught FNR around the world, and everywhere, what I've observed is parents wish for a better future for their children than the current reality that they're experiencing. And when I explain what positive steps they can take to create that better future, and when they're empowered and enabled, then I've witnessed this enthusiastic adoption of FMNR and like similar methods as well.
I see. Thank you for sharing. So you mentioned a bit about the fact that, it was families who like for the families, it was a lot about their children's futures that prompted them to take a bit more action as well. So just out of curiosity for Allan, how did you feel when you first came across, or when you first learned about climate change and, and learning that slash and burn practices and all were not great? Like, what was your motivation to change? Was it, as Tony mentioned, about family, or like what was the reason for you wanting to change, and how easy or difficult was it for you to adopt the new practices? Allan?
Can you repeat the question, ma'am?
Yes, we can hear you. So we just wanted to understand a bit more on what prompted you to decide to change your actions, particularly, especially since your community was used to doing, like, for example, slash and burn methods. So how did you decide to change your actions, and what were some of the challenges and opportunities involved?
Parang hindi daw magpadaya ng sasama na nag-decide po.
Yes, because I'm decided the me.
Okay, I think Allan unfortunately dropped off, so maybe we can just continue on this first and see when he comes in. So sorry about that. So, but it's okay. So for maybe let's just elaborate more a bit on Tony's side. So you mentioned driving from the same question, you mentioned that, you know, a lot of the local people were doing this for the family. So what challenges did you encounter when talking with the locals, and what were some of the opportunities that you witnessed?
Thanks, Matilda. So the biggest challenge is actually mindsets. And, you know, the media, the marketing people have given me various titles, the forest maker, the tree whisperer, but they're quite surprised when I tell them that 95% of my time involves mindscape change. And if I get this piece right, then the rest will follow. So what I try to do is convince communities that it's in their best interest that they and their children will have a better future if they work with nature instead of always fighting it and destroying it. And, you know, it's not just local people. We think, oh, they're uneducated, they're ignorant, and so on. Actually, I have the same battle with the experts, with scientists, with governments, with donors. And I've been teaching about FMNR for several decades. I think there's a perception that long-term complex problems require expensive, sophisticated technical solutions. But for 2 decades I've been teaching, actually, this very simple, low-cost, nature-based solution is revolutionary, and it has the power to change the history of nations. And I really mean that. I don't say that lightly. And if we do this at the scale that's possible globally, it has the power to change the history of the world in terms of climate change. So at the same time, there are enormous opportunities. And what I see is, as the impacts of climate change and extensive land degradation become more and more severe, governments and donors are going to be crying out for affordable solutions that actually work. And local communities will become more open to adopting these new ideas. So as much as we don't want to see hardship, I think those very conditions will drive us to seek the solutions. Thank you.
So you mentioned a bit about how local governments will start wanting to do a bit more in the area of climate change. So how has World Vision been working with the local government to tackle this issue of climate change?
Thank you. As a non-government organization, we're very aware that, first of all, we're guests in a country, and also we're not going to stay there forever. So we always seek to work very, very closely with the government, which is in the position, it's the government's responsibility to continue longer term programs. So we work to encourage them. In the case of FMNR, perhaps there's a need for a favorable policy which encourages farmers to have more trees on their land. In many cases, they simply don't own the trees on their land, and a simple change in that regulation will give people the incentive, the motivation to regenerate and plant more trees. So we do work very, very closely with local government.
I see. And what about NOMU? So how is there any national like eco movement agency or government agency that is stepping up to support your cause, or like have you partnered with any of them, or even mobilized them in terms of with the youth in your country?
I think I partner up with World Vision more than any other companies. As for youths, I try to on Instagram and through my social media, I connect with people and warn them and tell them of what I know of. And through that, a lot of people get interested and they write to me and they're like, I want to do something about it. I want to help you. I want to be involved. And then that's when we try to do, we can't really actually do an event. We don't have the resources of doing it. So instead of an event, we do a little posters or in social media. I mean, social media is the biggest platform that can go through someone, like that can inform people right now. So we use Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, and all of that to aware the others. And not just me, since the others are also involved in it, we work together to do it. So I don't really like particularly work with one person or like one youth group or anything like that. I just go with everyone and go with the flow. Yeah.
That's nice to know. I think okay, I think Allan is on board now. He just sent me his answer to the previous question that we asked him about what inspired him to make a change. So maybe I'll just invite Allan, do you want to share your answer personally? Yeah, so what inspired you to want to change your actions?
Ma'am, hello. We decided to make a policy because as a family man, I care more than that only the environment, but the future of my children and the children of our community. Our approved community policy will help control the cutting trees among our community people, especially the indigenous people living inside the watershed area. Second, sustainable fiber is in man worldwide. See this as potential for income generation among our farmers and waste from.
Okay. I think he dropped again. I'm really sorry to everyone on the line for the technical difficulties. Yeah, it's been a bit of a challenge, especially because right now in the Philippines, they have their internet is having a bit of issues at the moment. So hope for your understanding. So hopefully he'll be able to join us again. But in the meantime, maybe I'll just go back to Nomu. So just wanted to understand, you mentioned a bit more about like Instagram, social media, etc. So do you have like one story or one thing which you and your friends did that really helped to give that voice to climate action? Like what was the most, like for you, the most impactful memory perhaps that you have about your climate action work?
Okay, so I think everyone knows who Greta Thunberg is. You know, it's climate. And she started a movement on like, you know, Fridays for Future. And me and my friend, we started Fridays for Future in Mongolia. And we, since we can't, in Mongolia, we can't really march like openly. We have to get permission for that. And we tried to get permission, but we weren't allowed for it. So instead of like getting permission to do it, we protest online with pictures and stories. And right now, our platform is about to reach 10,000 followers. So that means 10. Wait, no, was it 1,000? No, just 1,000. Sorry, that was too much. I got confused for a second. So 1,000 followers. That means almost 1,000 people in Mongolia knows what's going on and knows that we need change. And these children that's following us, they send us photos and they protest with us, meaning that they're trying to help too. So that's like the biggest way that we like reached, that I and me and my friends like reached to others.
What about you, Tony? Is there a significant story or experience that inspired you or stood out to you in this long but needed journey to educate rural communities to embrace farmer-managed natural regeneration?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Like any particular story or that stood out to you during your entire experience?
You know, there's a lot of emphasis on the tree part and the regreening part of what I do. And it's certainly wonderful to see the restored land, the water, the food supply. Actually, when I go back and visit communities which have embraced and practiced this method, the biggest thing that strikes me is the restoration of hope. And it's wonderful. If you can imagine, if you can put yourself in the shoes of parents who cannot feed, clothe, or educate their children, and they feel like hopeless victims of climate change and poverty with no way out. And then suddenly they're introduced to this method which empowers them and gives them a high level of agency over creating the future that they want. This is very liberating. And when people have hope, then they act differently. They will invest in improvements in their farm. They will send their children to school, and they'll have a positive outlook to tackle the problems as they arise. So this has actually been the most inspiring thing for me, that people actually change, not just the environment, not just the climate, but people change, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to know that. Yeah, I mean, what you say is true. Like, you know, it all just starts with the mindset, and when people change, the ripple effect can become crazy. Like what Nomu shared just now about how, you know, as long as it starts from you, and then you can have that ripple effect to share with your family, your friends, and even now you have about 1,000 people just in Mongolia making a difference in the youth scene. So it's quite amazing how just from one individual we can really spread across and hopefully just change the world that we currently live in. Yeah. So one of our guests, one of our participants also actually asked Tony, like, what would you say would be the 3 most significant methods that can be adopted globally to actually improve the impact in terms of climate change, given the urgency of the matter? Like, it's, I mean, mindset is one of it, but what else can we do in terms of mitigation methods?
So you're talking about individuals or?
I guess both, all of it at at individual level, at the community level, or maybe even the policy level.
Okay, so I guess as an individual, do everything in your means that's possible. People often shrink from climate change. It's too big, it's out there, the governments should be doing it, not us. But if all you can do is turn the light switch off when you leave a room, by all means do it, and tell your friends to do the same. But we can do much more than that. Our consumption patterns, the types of, where does our food come from? What food miles are on that food? The things that we buy, at the end of their life cycle, are they disposed or are they recyclable? So our own habits, our own consumption can have a very big impact. I would say on a global level, on a policy level, we need to preserve the remaining forests and oceans of the world that are sequestering the excess carbon dioxide. Effectively, we're killing ourselves by being silent and witnessing the ongoing destruction of forests. Then beyond that, and it's in line with the work that I do, there are about 1 billion hectares of degraded land, which much of that could be reforested. There are in excess of 2 billion hectares of agricultural and grazing land, which could accommodate some level of tree cover. So it won't be a forest, but by increasing the right kinds of trees on this productive land, we can actually increase the production while doing something about climate change.
I mean, yeah, it's we can plant more trees, but interestingly, your example of also in our own personal experience of reusing and recycling bags, etc., that from, like, you know, it is important as well. No matter how small the efforts are, they can make a big difference. Talking about plastic bags, so I see that Allan is back, so let's try asking him another question again. So another of our participants actually asked, what is the most impactful product of the alpaca that is well received globally, as well as that is also eco-friendly? Can it replace plastic bags, for instance? So maybe, Allan, are you online? Would you be able to share a bit more on what on your experience in abaca farming, as well as the products that are being created, especially at the community level? Okay, so we'll give some time for the translation.
Can you rephrase the question, please?
Yeah, so what is the most impactful product of abaca, and how has it been received globally, and can it replace plastic bags?
Yes. Yes, I can. It can replace plastic bags given the right equipment. For now, we are still organizing and strengthening our local abaca farmers to come up with the right products. Actually, we are planning to produce the third eco bag made of abaca with the help of our local farmers here in our village.
So the local farmers in the village are trying to produce eco bags right now to solve this plastic problem. Is that right? Sorry, I think he dropped again. It's okay. So basically, from what we understand right here from the project's perspective, that is one of the areas that is being used right now. So for example, plastic bags as well as tea bags, coffee filters, etc. That has been some of the users that of the abaca farming that we hope to be able to expand out in future, particularly as we train up the farmers like Allan in the North Cotabato region in the Philippines. Thank you. So another question that we have for another question that we have for Tony here from Cecilia. How do we know if the shrubs are actually trees underneath? Is there a way to recognize such shrubs? Does this underground forest possibly burn down forests? I guess part of it, the second part of it is, so the first part is there a way to recognize the shrubs? And the second part of it is it possible that this underground forest was actually forest that was burned down previously? I think that's what I get from this question.
Thank you. So, the very first time I realized that the tree stumps were not shrubs, they're actually trees. And I'd been in that landscape for nearly 2.5 years, thinking that the only solution was to plant new trees. But I looked at the leaf of one of these shrubs, and a leaf for most species is like a signature, an individual signature for a species. And immediately when I saw the shape of that leaf, I realized it's not a shrub, it's a tree. And everything went from there. Now, I travel to many countries and I don't know the species in the countries I go to, but you can always ask the locals. There's indigenous knowledge, or you can ask a forester. And I guess if you're going to stay in a new place, be willing to experiment, trial and error. And when you select these what look like shrubs and you thin the excess shoots and prune them, then you just wait and see, well, how is it going to behave? Will it grow tall or will it remain short? So you can work it out. Sometimes you don't know at the start, but you can work it out. Will this work after a forest fire? Well, in Australian conditions, usually, definitely yes, because the trees are adapted to fire conditions and they re-sprout after fire from the trunks, from the roots, they will re-sprout. In many situations, the seeds of the trees have a mechanism that responds to either heat or smoke. And after the fire has passed, and with the first rains, they will then germinate. Now, in our last severe fires, it was so intense, and this is because of climate change, that it absolutely incinerated the forest and it lost its capacity to regenerate in certain places. So this was terrible, and it's quite frightening. What's it going to be like in the future? But I would argue that even in those conditions, if we treat that land differently, as long as there's some remnant forest, nature itself will bring in seed in the wind, in the water, on the bodies of birds and animals. So there's always hope, but we really must fight climate change. Otherwise, we're in for a terrible future.
Yeah, so Tony has talked a bit about hope as well as a bit of the fact that there needs to be a bit of trial and error in terms of coming up with solutions. So just out of curiosity for Nomu yourself, based on your experience, how can we help others realize that they have been unknowingly harming the environment, making them feel without making them feel defensive? So that's another question that is related to what Tony shared, that one of our audiences have also asked. So would you like to expand a bit on that? Like, how have you been personally doing it without making people feel defensive? Just talking about the issues of climate change, etc. It can be quite personal.
For me, I have never experienced the defensiveness. It was always just like, oh yeah, is that it? Okay, bye. It was always like that. So if I always had to like break through this a blockage of them like just like underestimating the climate and then them just taking it as, oh, it's another climate issue kind of thingy. More of it being defensive. They weren't defensive. They were just like, didn't care.
So what do you do for those people that just didn't care?
Well, I'm an annoying person for myself. And when I'm annoying, I just annoy them the whole day. And then, well, of course, that's not going to work like all the time. So I usually just make them like see how it's changing and like why it's changing and what's really important. But that usually takes about months. That actually took like a year with my family and like 2 or 3 months with my friends to like actually let them understand what's actually going on. They were very adamant to understand it and they didn't really care about it. So I had to like make them interested in the topic.
Is that something you personally experienced as well, Tony, in the field? Like, you have people who are defensive or just don't care? Like, how do you deal with that?
Sorry.
You're on mute. So we are looking at so Nomu mentioned that for her, she hasn't really met people who are defensive, but it was more of people who just don't care. So she had to be a bit more persistent. So what about in your case, when you work on the ground or even in your networks? Like, have you encountered people who are defensive or just don't care? And how do you deal with that to make that change, especially when you work in FMNR and you need the local cooperation?
Definitely. When you think about it, people are fearful. Here comes this outsider who's going to tell us what to do. And we're already desperately poor. We get our livelihood from the forest by cutting trees, by grazing there. If he stops us, we will be even poorer. So people are fearful more than, they're defensive, but it's driven by fear. So I have to be very respectful. I have to listen to people. What's driving their actions? What's their motivation? And we often, if I do a workshop, we'll run this exercise. I call it past, present, future. Because I don't want to win an argument. I want people to come to their own conclusions. So I ask, in the past, when you were children, what was the environment like? And usually there's a wonderful memory. There was plenty of water, the soil was fertile, we had food, there were wildlife, and so on. And then I ask, what's it like now? And they say, oh, things are getting worse and worse. The weather's changed. We can never rely on the rainfall. We're often hungry. There's no fuel wood. The animals have disappeared. And then I ask, if we continue business as usual, destroying the environment, what will the future be like for your children? And this is a shock. They may not have been to school, they may not be highly educated, but they know very well things will only get worse. And so then I say, do you think there's something that we can do about this? And I share the Niger story and what some of the poorest people in the world on the edge of the Sahara Desert with very, very little external assistance. Look at what they achieved. Do you think this might be possible here? And then we go from there. But yeah, definitely there's resistance, but we mustn't create more resistance. We've got to bring people on board and see things through their eyes.
So how long does this process take? Just trying to convince them and trying to get that paradigm shift in their mindset?
Well, you need some patience. In Niger, they actually called me the crazy white farmer. And if you look at what it took probably a decade. But fortunately, we don't have to wait a decade, and we've learned so much from that experience. These days, we see communities adopting FMNR in less than a year, sometimes 2 years or more. But because we have the before and after photos from Niger, we have the luxury sometimes of taking people to visit, and we've learned so much about learning through peers. Farmers like to learn from farmers. Women will learn from women, and children from children. So it doesn't have to take a long time. And fortunately with FMNR, the benefits come early, even within the same year. There's some level of benefit, either fuel wood or fodder or slightly improved micro climate. So people get to see and adopt it fairly quickly.
Nice. Okay. So actually, Allan, if you are on the call, I just wanted to ask as well, because as Tony mentioned, it takes a long time and you probably need the influence of families and community members to influence each other. So as the village leader in the Philippines, how have you been able to convince your community to make changes? Like, what were some challenges and opportunities? Would you be able to share? I hope that your internet connection is there. I can see you, but not sure if you are there. Allan?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what were the challenges and opportunities in terms of trying to convince your communities to make change?
As village leader, I convene the IP people to stop the cutting of trees because the environment is lost, and replace to plant the abaca, because the abaca is very important of our land. For example, the land is very slope. The abaca holding to the soil erosion, because the abaca up to 10 years is lifespan is up to 10 years. The abaca is very good idea to soil erosion, to control soil erosion, so that the many people or people to educate about plant abaca, because the abaca is introducing the DNR government to plant our watershed area or protected area inside the North Cotabato village.
So I guess it's trying to convince them about the impact of the abaca farming, and from there, they would be they'll be convinced to take it on their own. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I see. Okay, so Thank you for sharing. So actually, Nomu, we have another question that is for you. So one of the questions is, as you advocate engaging locals to interact with your government, would other options such as planting more trees help? As for the authority, oh wait, the question disappeared.
Yeah,
So maybe
yeah, I just read the question and I think I answered it. Yeah. Can I say?
Yeah, sure, go on.
Okay, so the thing is that, of course, planting more trees is going to help and it is a good thing. However, in Mongolia, we don't have the resources to stop desertification with water. We don't have the water resources. Mongolia doesn't have that much water resources, which is also why we have a lot of deserts, which is also why we're desertificated. How do you say that? That's okay. I don't know how to say it. I think you all understood what I just said, but it's something like that. And then another point is that desertification itself is like, it's Mongolia's grass and Mongolia's land is not really, some parts of it is not really appropriate to plant trees. And some parts of it is actually unable to grow trees or something like that. Yes. And I actually asked a professional about like, just like everyone, I told them, couldn't we just plant more trees and make it a little bit less or something like that. I even suggested a dumb idea of like taking all the sands and stuff. That didn't work. And yeah, they said it was not possible, and they actually did try to do it, but they failed.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's interesting that for a lot of us, we think of like just climate change equating to trees, but actually it's a lot more than that. Sometimes trees are important and we should definitely need to green the lands, but sometimes we need other technologies as well, especially in places where tree planting unfortunately doesn't work, or they don't really have such opportunities for farmer managed natural regeneration as well, like Singapore is quite land scarce as well. So I guess that would be some challenges and opportunities as well in terms of seeing other technologies being developed. Okay, so right now I'm a bit mindful of time. So unfortunately, maybe it will be good for us to stop the Q&A session here. But thank you very much, Tony, Allan, as well as Nomu, for sharing for your sharings as well as your insights, and for just letting us know that there's such a large area of work that needs to be done in terms of fighting climate change, and like, you know, we can all do our simple part as individuals. So thank you very much for your sharings. Yeah, so before we end, so for those of you who were actually inspired by Tony, Allan, as well as Nomu's sharing, and were wondering how can you be involved in fighting climate change, so here are some ways in which you can partner World Vision to concurrently protect both the people as well as the planet. So for those of you who are not aware, since 2020, World Vision Singapore actually made a renewed commitment to care for the earth and act in ways that will restore and protect the environment as well as our children's futures. So consequently, we have actually established a Fight Climate Change Fund specially dedicated to this cause. And the fund actually aims to create a climate resilient future through three main approaches. So firstly, we actually invest in climate mitigation efforts to reduce or prevent carbon emissions. So for example, in the case of Mongolia, trying to reduce coal usage through clean energy, or even tree planting, or as Tony's signature method, farmer managed natural regeneration, where we don't just plant trees, but actually encourage the growth of shrubs to help them to naturally become forested. So secondly, we also try to support actions which help vulnerable communities to adapt and cope with the effects of climate change. So for example, disaster risk reduction techniques, teaching them how to protect themselves during a disaster, or even supporting communities like Allan's to actually develop environmentally friendly livelihood, be it through abaka farming, through producing abaka-related products, or even other types of environmentally friendly livelihoods like beekeeping, etc. Okay, and the third thing that World Vision Singapore also advocates for as part of our Fight Climate Change Fund is that we also support natural resource management to protect the natural environment, like conserving water or encouraging reuse, reduce, recycle. So these are some of the areas in which we actively promote through our Fight Climate Change Fund. And in the last year alone, with the support of partners like yourselves, World Vision Singapore was actually able to safeguard the futures of more than 25,000 people and protected the environment by reducing at least 5,400 tons of carbon dioxide. So we are quite proud of this achievement, especially in the last 1 year, but definitely more needs to be done. So thankfully, last year we were able to plant more than 800,000 trees in Ethiopia through the FNNR method promoted by Tony. And we also installed 2 solar kiosks in Mongolia, for example, to actually reduce reliance on coal and increase water access, just to solve the problems of air and water pollution, which Nomu highlighted. Okay, but as mentioned again, in the discussions with Tony, Allan, and Nomu, there's still a lot more to be done, and little changes can add up to be a big difference. We can create a ripple effect to help more vulnerable people to fight against climate change. So at this stage, I would just like to invite everyone who feel inspired by today's sharings to really join us in this quest to protect the earth for the sake of our children's futures, if not for the sake of the environment itself. So at present, we have 2 projects ongoing. So the first project is actually in Mongolia, as shared by Nomu. Mongolia is currently having significant water and air pollution issues. So with your support, we aim to actually implement a series of activities that aim to fight climate change while concurrently improving water, sanitation, and hygiene in the local community of Seleng in Mongolia. So to give you an idea of how your money will be used, for example, a contribution of $35 can help to train 10 people in climate resilient water practices, while $150 can contribute towards building solar water systems to provide clean water as well as reduce carbon emissions. Okay. Additionally, the project also involves other activities, for example, building a water treatment facility to treat and recycle used water, which can then be further used to water the neighboring school gardens to provide children with vegetables, for example. So these are some of the activities. This is an example of the project that we have in Mongolia that is ongoing. And the second project that we have is actually in Allan's community. So for those who were interested in the work that Allan mentioned about abaca farming, we are actually working with the farmers in Allan's community to encourage them to take up abaca farming to reduce the use of plastics globally. So we want to set forth that value chain to ensure that there are sufficient products in the market that can reduce and replace substitutes, reduce and replace plastics. So providing like opportunities for abaca as a substitute for plastic. So while concurrently increasing both the number of trees, protecting watersheds, and increasing the incomes of local communities. So in the case of this project, an example of how your money will be used is like a contribution of $50 can help to train a family in developing the eco-friendly abaca products like the plastic, like the eco bags that was mentioned, hats, placemats, etc., so that the communities can generate more income alongside. And also about $220 can actually kickstart a family's journey in abaca farming by providing them with the necessary seeds as well as the necessary sustainable farming training. So as part of this project, we'll also be actively raising awareness on climate change issues so that more farmers and community members can actually be empowered to protect the natural environment. So like what our speakers mentioned, it always takes an individual, but we need a ripple effect to be created. So that's where we'll be actively raising awareness as well, partnering with people like Allan, so that more people can be roped in to do abaca farming and protect the environment and hopefully eliminate slash and burn as well as protect the watershed areas. So for those of you who are interested to partner with World Vision to make a climate resilient future, you can give a one-time giving towards these projects. Or if you can, we do hope that you can join us in ensuring a more sustained efforts to fight climate change by making a monthly pledge of $29 a month towards our Fight Climate Change Fund. So in this sense, for less than $1 a day, you will not only be helping the 2 projects that I mentioned earlier, but you'll also help to ensure that we can take on even more projects to do more for the people and the environment. So specifically by supporting the Fight Climate Change Fund, you will be helping us to really work towards a goal of safeguarding the futures of about 100,000 children and protecting the environment by reducing 15,000 tons of carbon dioxide by 2023. Okay, so these are some examples of how you can contribute, and to find out more, we welcome you to visit our website by scanning the QR code on the screen, or by WhatsApping us at 69220113. And one of our staff members will actually follow up with you if you have more questions or would like to know more about how you can be involved as well in our fight climate change work. So I think this is all the time we have today. So I would just like to thank all our speakers, Tony, Allan, and Nomu, for just taking this time on a Saturday to share your insights. And for all those who came on board this webinar this morning as well, thank you so much for your time.